My name is Diana. I am 33 years old and I work as a senior forensic corporate auditor. Exactly 1 year after my brutal divorce, I ran into my ex-husband at the hospital. He stood in the crowded corridor, smirking down at me, while my former best friend stood beside him holding their 1-year-old son. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "Leaving me was the best decision he ever made, because a useless woman cannot have children." I did not cry. I did not scream. I just smiled, checked my watch, and waited for the exact moment his entire fake life shattered into a million pieces. 2 minutes later, a man walked into that hallway, and my former best friend dropped her baby bottle in pure terror. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic people who underestimated your worth. It was a rainy Tuesday morning in downtown Seattle. I was standing near the fourth-floor nurse station at Seattle General Hospital, waiting to pick up the post-operation discharge papers for my younger sister Sylvia. She had just undergone a routine appendectomy, and my mind was focused entirely on getting her home safely. I wore a tailored charcoal blazer and held my leather briefcase tightly against my side. As an auditor, I spent my days tearing apart fraudulent corporate ledgers and tracking missing millions for high-tier clients. I was trained to remain completely devoid of emotion under extreme pressure. That training was about to be tested in the most spectacular way possible. I turned away from the reception desk holding Sylvia's medical chart. I took exactly 2 steps down the busy fluorescent-lit corridor before my path was abruptly blocked. Standing directly in front of me, blocking the entire width of the hallway, was Greg, my ex-husband. He was 36 years old, wearing an expensive navy blue custom suit and a smug expression that instantly made my stomach turn. Standing right next to him was Monica. She was 33 years old, and until 2 years ago, she had been my absolute best friend in the entire world. Resting on Monica's hip, dressed in a designer blue onesie, was a chubby 1-year-old baby boy. The sheer audacity of the ambush was staggering. I tried to sidestep them, but Greg intentionally shifted his weight to block me again. He wanted an audience. The hospital corridor was packed with nurses visiting families and doctors holding clipboards, but Greg did not care. He wanted to humiliate me in public. "Well, well, well," Greg announced, his voice booming loudly enough to make a passing nurse turn her head. "If it is not my cold, unfeeling ex-wife. What are you doing in a hospital, Diana? Did your frozen heart finally give out?" I stared at him. My resting heart rate stayed perfectly steady. "I am here for Sylvia," I replied, my voice completely flat and professional. "Step aside, Greg. I do not have time for your childish games." But Greg was not going to let his golden opportunity pass. He had spent our entire marriage trying to make me feel small to cover up his own deep insecurities as a wealth management vice president who constantly rode the coattails of his superiors. He puffed out his chest and looked down at me with an expression of pure, venomous triumph. He pointed a manicured finger right at my face. "You always thought you were so much better than me, Diana." Greg sneered, leaning in closer so the people sitting in the nearby waiting chairs could hear every single word. "You prioritized your stupid auditing career over giving me a family. You made me feel like I was never enough. But the truth is, you were just broken. You are a barren, useless woman. Look at what I have now. Look at this perfect, beautiful son. Leaving you was the absolute best decision I ever made in my entire life. I am so incredibly lucky to have a real woman like Monica who can actually give me a family." Monica chimed in right on cue. She shifted the baby boy on her hip and let out a high-pitched, condescending laugh. She reached up to brush a stray lock of blonde hair behind her ear, making sure the massive diamond engagement ring on her finger caught the harsh hospital lighting. "Oh, let her be, Monica," said her voice dripping with fake pity. "It must be so hard for Diana to see us so happy." "You know, Diana, I honestly feel bad for you. You spend all your time chasing corporate frauds, but you could not even keep your own husband satisfied. You are going to grow old completely alone in your cold, empty apartment while we are out here building a legacy." She stroked the baby's fine hair, giving me a look of absolute toxic victory. He just started walking last week. Monica bragged, her tone sharp and vindictive. Greg is such a wonderful father. He bought us a $2 million house in Bellevue just so the baby could have a massive backyard. Something you could never give him because your body is a failure. The people in the hallway were actively staring now. A few women looked at me with pity. A man in a wheelchair shook his head. They all expected me to break down. They expected me to drop my files, burst into tears, and run away from the devastating sight of my ex-husband living a picture-perfect life with my former best friend. They expected the betrayed barren ex-wife to crumble under the weight of their cruel words. But I was a senior forensic corporate auditor. I did not deal in raw emotions. I dealt in hard, verifiable facts. And the facts I was currently holding in my back pocket were about to completely incinerate their manufactured happiness. I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice or hurl an insult back at them. Instead, I looked at Greg's smug face, then looked at the expensive diamond ring on Monica's finger. I let out a soft, genuine laugh. I reached into my blazer pocket, pulled out my cell phone, and checked the time on the digital screen. It was exactly 10:14 in the morning. Really, Greg? I asked, my voice perfectly calm and laced with a razor-sharp edge. You think leaving me was the best decision you ever made? Greg frowned, his arrogant smile faltering for a fraction of a second. His fragile ego could not process why I was not crying and begging for him to stop. Yes, he barked loudly, trying to regain his dominance over the situation. You are nothing but a bitter, lonely woman, Diana. I smiled, stepping just a single inch closer to him. My eyes locked onto his, completely unbothered by his attempts to break me. Let us see if you still feel that way in about 60 seconds, I replied, my voice echoing slightly in the tense hospital corridor. Because the reality of your perfect little family is about to come walking right through those elevator doors. Greg let out a harsh, dismissive scoff. He glanced over his shoulder at the closed silver doors of the elevator bank and then turned back to me with a look of absolute, unadulterated contempt. He thought I was bluffing. He genuinely believed I was just a desperate, lonely woman trying to save face in a public hallway after being utterly humiliated. His massive, fragile ego simply could not handle the fact that I was not shattered into pieces. He needed to see me bleed. He needed to break me completely before those elevator doors ever opened. Greg handed Monica a small designer diaper bag and took a deliberate, aggressive step forward, invading my personal space. He leaned down so his face was mere inches from mine. The scent of his expensive custom cologne mixed with the sterile, sharp smell of the hospital corridor, making me feel briefly nauseous. He dropped his voice from a loud theatrical boom to a low, vicious whisper designed specifically to cut straight to my core where no one else could hear. You have always been a delusional, arrogant bitch, Diana, Greg hissed, his eyes narrowing into dark, cruel slits. You stand there in your cheap corporate blazer, checking your watch like you still have some sort of power over me. You have absolutely nothing. You are a biological dead end. During our entire marriage, I had to pretend it was okay that you were defective. I had to smile and hold your hand while you cried over negative pregnancy tests. But the truth is, I was completely disgusted by you. You were a bad investment, a broken, defective asset. Why would a man like me waste my prime earning years tied to a woman who could not even fulfill her basic biological purpose? Monica shifted the baby, resting her chin on his soft head, and smirked. She did not even have the decency to look ashamed of betraying a decade of our close friendship. She just stood there basking in the glow of the stolen life she had built on the ruins of my marriage. Greg wrapped his arms securely around Monica's waist, pulling her close to emphasize his point. He wanted to make sure I saw the picture-perfect family unit he had replaced me with. You thought you were so incredibly smart during the divorce? Greg continued, his whisper turning frantic with manic pride. You thought your fancy forensic auditing skills gave you the upper hand in mediation. You thought you stripped me down to my base salary. You made me sit in that stuffy lawyer's office and swear under oath that my liquid assets were divided perfectly down the middle. You really thought I walked away with just a fraction of my wealth because you cornered my legal team? Greg let out a dark, terrifying chuckle. He leaned in even closer, his breath hot against my cheek. I played you, Diana, he bragged, his arrogance completely blinding him to his own fatal mistake. I played you and your overpriced divorce attorney for absolute fools. You think a senior vice president at a top-tier wealth management firm just accepts a standard salary. You think I bought a $2 million estate in Bellevue with a conventional mortgage. I secured massive seven-figure executive bonuses months before I ever handed you those divorce papers. I funneled them through discreet channels right under your supposedly brilliant auditor nose. I hid millions in cash to ensure my real family had the luxury they deserved, while you got stuck fighting over the scraps of our joint checking account. The cruel insults about my body and my infertility completely evaporated into the sterile hospital air. My emotional processing shut down instantly, and the cold, clinical machinery of my forensic auditor brain booted up. Greg thought he was delivering a devastating emotional blow to a heartbroken ex-wife. Instead, he had just handed me a signed verbal confession to a severe financial crime. My mind began working at lightning speed, cross-referencing every single financial disclosure document Greg had submitted during our divorce settlement 1 year ago. Under penalty of perjury, he had sworn to a family court judge that his total annual compensation was capped at $250,000. He had sworn there were no external bonuses, no hidden portfolios, and no offshore routing accounts. But a $2 million Bellevue house required a minimum down payment of $400,000 in clean liquid cash just to secure the deed. Add the cost of Monica's massive diamond ring, the designer baby clothes, and the luxury vehicles they were undoubtedly driving. The math did not just look suspicious. The math was a screaming neon sign of criminal perjury. To bypass the intense scrutiny of my divorce lawyers, Greg would have needed to wash those executive bonuses through shadow accounts. If he was hiding money of that magnitude, he was using his corporate wealth management privileges to do it. He had just confessed to asset concealment, tax evasion, and lying under oath in a federal family court. He had handed me the exact thread I needed to unravel his entire existence. I cataloged every single syllable that just left his mouth, locking the confession away in a mental vault. I looked at his smug, gloating face. He was smiling so widely his eyes were crinkling at the corners. He felt completely invincible. He had successfully discarded his barren wife, upgraded to a younger model, secured a male heir, and financially outsmarted a senior corporate auditor. He truly believed he was the untouchable king of his own pathetic little universe. You really should not have told me that. Greg, I whispered back, my voice carrying a tone of absolute chilling finality, because perjury is not a civil disagreement. It is a federal felony. Greg scoffed again, rolling his eyes as he stepped back. Oh, please, Diana, he mocked, waving his hand dismissively in the air. Go ahead and call your lawyers. Tell them I bragged in a hospital hallway. There is absolutely no paper trail. You have zero proof. I covered my tracks perfectly. You are just making pathetic, empty threats because you know you lost everything and I won. His smile widened as he looked at Monica, who giggled and kissed the baby's plump cheek. He was so completely focused on his own perceived victory that he did not notice the heavy mechanical hum of the elevator arriving directly behind him. He did not hear the bright digital chime signaling that my 60 seconds were officially up. He just stood there waiting for me to walk away in defeat, completely unaware of the absolute nightmare waiting on the other side of those silver doors. The bright digital chime of the elevator arriving echoed sharply through the tense hospital corridor, shattering the sterile silence. The heavy silver doors slid open with a smooth mechanical hiss, perfectly synchronized with the exact moment my 60 seconds expired. Greg did not turn around immediately. He was too busy reveling in his own manufactured victory, too obsessed with watching my face for a reaction to care about whoever was stepping off the elevator behind him. But the sudden shift in the atmospheric pressure of the hallway was impossible to ignore. Stepping out of the elevator car was my brother-in-law, Kendrick. He was an African-American man standing at an imposing 6'4", with the broad, muscular build of a former collegiate athlete. He was dressed in a razor-sharp, black tailored suit that perfectly matched his lethal professional reputation. Kendrick was not just Sylvia's husband. He was a high-powered federal attorney and a senior investigator specializing in medical fraud for the United States government. He possessed a commanding, terrifying presence that instantly silenced a room the moment he entered it. He moved with absolute predatory purpose, his dark eyes locked entirely on the back of Greg's head. But Kendrick was not walking alone. Marching in perfect step right beside him was Cameron. If Kendrick represented the crushing weight of the federal legal system, Cameron represented the terrifying, volatile power of untouchable wealth. Cameron was a ruthless underground crypto broker known for moving massive amounts of unregulated capital through digital shadow markets. He wore a custom-tailored Italian silk suit with a platinum watch on his wrist that cost more than Greg's entire base salary. He was also one of the most lucrative and highly prioritized clients at Greg's wealth management firm. Greg had spent the last 3 years practically breaking his back to keep Cameron happy, constantly bragging about how he was personally managing the crypto broker's legitimate offshore investments. Cameron did not look happy today. His face was a hardened mask of pure, unadulterated fury. The veins in his neck were visibly bulging against his crisp white shirt collar. His jaw was clenched so tightly it looked like his teeth might shatter under the immense pressure. But the most terrifying detail was his intense focus. Cameron was not looking at Greg. His burning, furious eyes were locked directly onto Monica and the baby boy resting on her hip. The heavy, rhythmic thud of their expensive leather shoes against the hospital linoleum finally forced Greg to turn around. He spun on his heel, an annoyed scowl forming on his face at the sudden interruption. But the moment his eyes registered who was standing right behind him, the arrogant sneer completely evaporated. His entire posture violently shifted. The cruel, vindictive ex-husband instantly morphed into a desperate, groveling corporate employee who had just been caught off guard by his most important client. "Cameron!" Greg stammered, his voice pitching upward in forced, overly enthusiastic surprise. He practically shoved Monica to the side so he could step forward and extend his hand. "What a pleasant surprise. What are you doing here at Seattle General? If you needed me to review the quarterly portfolio reports, you could have just called my private cell. I would have come straight to your office." Cameron completely ignored Greg's outstretched hand. He did not say a single word. He just stood there vibrating with a lethal, aggressive energy, staring right past Greg's shoulder at the woman clutching the baby. Monica's reaction was instantaneous and entirely catastrophic. The smug, condescending smirk she had worn just moments ago melted off her face like wax held to an open flame. All the blood drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking like a terrified, hollowed-out ghost. Her eyes darted wildly between Cameron and the heavy manila envelope Kendrick was holding. Her breathing turned shallow and erratic. She knew exactly why Cameron was here. The intricate web of lies she had spun to secure her $2 million house and her luxury lifestyle was unraveling right in front of her eyes. Greg looked confused, his hand awkwardly dropping back to his side. He looked from Cameron to Kendrick, his brow furrowing as he tried to process why a federal medical fraud investigator was standing shoulder to shoulder with his wealthiest crypto client. He opened his mouth to ask a question, but Kendrick did not give him the opportunity to speak. Kendrick closed the remaining distance between them, stepping directly into Greg's personal space. He loomed over my ex-husband, forcing Greg to physically crane his neck backward just to meet his gaze. Kendrick did not offer a polite greeting. He did not ask how Greg was doing. He moved with the cold mechanical efficiency of a federal executioner delivering a fatal blow. Kendrick raised his right hand, holding a thick, heavily sealed manila envelope. With a sudden, aggressive motion, he slapped the heavy envelope directly flat against the center of Greg's chest. The loud smack of the thick paper hitting Greg's expensive navy suit echoed down the entire hospital corridor. The physical impact forced Greg to stumble backward a single step, his hands instinctively flying up to catch the envelope before it fell to the floor. "What the hell is this, Kendrick?" Greg demanded, his voice shaking with a mixture of anger and rising panic as his fingers gripped the edges of the paper. "You cannot just walk up and assault me in a public hospital. What kind of game are you and Diana playing? I am not playing any games, Greg Kendrick replied, his deep baritone voice rumbling with absolute legal authority. His tone carried clearly down the hallway, commanding the attention of everyone standing nearby. That envelope contains a legally binding federal subpoena regarding a comprehensive medical fraud investigation. You are officially being served. I suggest you open it right now because the information inside is going to permanently alter the trajectory of your entire life. Greg stared at Kendrick, his mouth hanging slightly open. He looked down at the thick envelope in his hands, the federal seal stamped clearly across the flap, mocking his fragile ego. He could not comprehend how a routine morning of harassing his ex-wife had suddenly escalated into being served with federal medical documents. He slowly hooked his finger under the seal and ripped the envelope open. Behind him, the ultimate breaking point was finally reached. Monica could no longer maintain the illusion. The absolute sheer terror of facing the reality of her own actions overwhelmed her physical motor functions. Her hands began to shake uncontrollably as she looked into Cameron's furious eyes. The heavy plastic baby bottle she had been holding slipped straight through her manicured fingers. It plummeted toward the ground, hitting the hard hospital linoleum floor with a loud, sharp crack. The plastic cap shattered on impact, sending a massive splash of white formula erupting across the corridor. The liquid splattered violently against the polished floor, pooling around the tips of Greg's expensive leather shoes. The loud crack of the breaking bottle shattered the remaining silence in the hallway, causing the baby in Monica's arms to let out a startled, piercing cry. The absolute nightmare I had promised had officially arrived, and it was about to burn their perfect little world entirely to the ground. Greg stared down at the spilled white liquid soaking into the stitching of his Italian leather shoes. The piercing wail of the baby echoed off the clinical walls, but Greg did not move to comfort his supposed son. His eyes were glued to the first page of the medical documents, his hands shaking so badly the paper rattled audibly in the quiet corridor. He scanned the dense medical terminology, his brain completely failing to process the catastrophic information sitting right in front of him. He looked up at Kendrick, his face twisting into a mask of confused, frantic denial. "What is this garbage?" Greg demanded, his voice cracking as he waved the papers in the air. "This is a joke. This is some kind of sick forged document Diana cooked up because she is jealous. You think you can scare me with fake hospital records?" Kendrick did not flinch. He reached out with lightning speed and snatched the documents right back out of Greg's trembling hands. "Since your reading comprehension seems to be failing under pressure, allow me to translate it for the entire hallway," Kendrick said, his deep voice projecting with the absolute authority of a federal courtroom. Kendrick flipped to the second page, holding it up so the official hospital letterhead was visible. "2 months ago, your wealth management firm mandated a comprehensive executive physical and biometric screening for a newly upgraded $10 million corporate life insurance policy," Kendrick announced, ensuring every single person in the corridor could hear him. Those blood samples were routed through a federal diagnostic lab. The screening flagged a severe genetic anomaly. It triggered an automatic secondary review under federal medical guidelines. Greg swallowed hard, a bead of sweat tracing down his temple. "My blood work was fine," he stammered, taking a half step backward. "I am in perfect health." "Your cardiovascular health is perfectly fine," Greg Kendrick corrected him, staring down at my ex-husband with eyes like chips of black ice. "But your reproductive system is fundamentally non-existent. The genetic sequencing confirmed the presence of a rare, irreversible chromosomal microdeletion. You suffer from complete azoospermia. You do not produce a single viable reproductive cell. You never have. You are 100% permanently sterile, Greg. You have been sterile since the day you were born." The words hung in the air, heavy and lethal. The passing nurses stopped walking. The patients in the waiting area stared in absolute stunned silence. I stood perfectly still, my hands folded neatly in front of my blazer, watching the exact moment Greg's entire fabricated reality was violently annihilated. For years he had tormented me. He had gaslighted me into believing my body was a defective failure. He had watched me cry over negative tests, and quietly rejoiced in his own imagined superiority. But the medical truth was finally exposed under the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital. I was never the problem. Greg was the biological dead end. No, Greg whispered, shaking his head frantically. The denial was so deep it bordered on temporary insanity. No, that is a lie. That is a clinical impossibility. He pointed a trembling finger at the crying baby in Monica's arms. Look at him. He is my son. Monica and I conceived him naturally. She gave me the family Diana could not. You are making this up to ruin me. Kendrick did not say another word. He simply took a step back and let the real father take the floor. Cameron stepped forward, the sheer force of his rage seeming to suck the oxygen right out of the hallway. He did not look at Greg. He walked directly up to Monica, who was now openly weeping, clutching the crying baby against her chest, as if the child could shield her from the incoming destruction. Tell him, Monica, Cameron demanded, his voice a low, terrifying growl that promised absolute financial and social ruin. Tell your pathetic husband exactly whose DNA is running through that boy's veins. Monica sobbed violently, shaking her head side to side, unable to form a coherent sentence. Her carefully constructed gold digger facade had completely collapsed. Cameron turned his furious gaze onto Greg. You arrogant, stupid fool! Cameron spat the words, hitting Greg like physical blows. You spent the last 3 years kissing my boots trying to manage my crypto portfolios. You invited me to your country club dinners. You bragged about your beautiful new girlfriend. And while you were busy trying to play the big shot wealth manager, she was showing up at my penthouse. She knew I had a net worth 10 times larger than yours. She wanted a bigger payout. Greg's jaw dropped, his eyes darting frantically between Cameron and Monica. Monica. Greg gasped, his voice sounding small and broken. What is he talking about? Tell him he is lying. She slept with me for 6 months behind your back. Cameron continued, completely ignoring Greg's pathetic pleas. She got pregnant and realized she could play both sides of the board. She slapped your name on the birth certificate to secure that $2 million house in Bellevue and a diamond ring. Then she secretly came to me with a private paternity test, demanding $50,000 a month in untraceable crypto transfers to keep my name off the public record and avoid a scandal. She used you as the stable real estate ATM, and she used me as the genetic lottery ticket. The absolute silence in the hallway returned, broken only by Monica's loud, gasping sobs and the baby's continuous crying. Greg stood frozen. The human brain can only process a certain amount of catastrophic trauma before the logical circuits completely overload and primal animalistic rage takes over. Greg realized in one horrifying second that his entire life was a humiliating joke. His perfect son was a lie. His beautiful new wife was a manipulative extortionist who had slept with his wealthiest client. And he had just loudly broadcasted his own supposed superiority to his ex-wife, who was currently standing 10 feet away watching his destruction with a calm, satisfied smile. A guttural, agonizing scream ripped from Greg's throat. It was not a scream of sadness. It was a roar of pure, unadulterated violence. Greg lunged forward, his hands curling into tight fists, aiming directly for Cameron's face. He threw a wild, desperate punch fueled by the absolute destruction of his massive ego. But Cameron was not a soft corporate executive. He operated in the dark, volatile underground of cryptocurrency. Cameron easily dodged the clumsy swing, stepping inside Greg's reach and driving a brutal, swift punch straight into Greg's ribs. The impact drove the breath from Greg's lungs, but the manic adrenaline kept him moving. He tackled Cameron, slamming the wealthy broker against the hospital wall. A framed medical poster shattered behind them, sending shards of plastic and paper raining down onto the linoleum. Monica screamed in sheer terror, backing away and pressing herself against the reception desk to protect the baby. The brawl lasted exactly 4 seconds. 3 massive hospital security guards who had been hovering near the elevator since Kendrick's arrival sprinted down the corridor. They crashed into the 2 men with the force of a freight train. 2 guards grabbed Greg by his custom suit jacket, wrestling him violently to the ground. Greg kicked and thrashed, screaming obscenities at Monica, screaming at Cameron, screaming at the entire world. The third guard secured Cameron, pulling him back and ordering him to stand down. I stood precisely where I had been the entire time, my leather briefcase held securely at my side. I looked down at Greg. His expensive navy suit was torn, his tie was ripped, and his face was pressed hard against the formula-stained hospital floor by a 200-pound security guard. His perfect life had just been violently erased. And the most beautiful part of this entire spectacle was that my real revenge had not even started yet. The heavy silver doors of the second elevator bank slid open with a soft mechanical chime, completely oblivious to the violent chaos unfolding in the corridor. Stepping out into the fluorescent-lit hallway was Patricia. Greg's 60-year-old mother was dressed in a tailored cream Chanel suit, clutching a pristine designer handbag and a brightly wrapped gift box from an expensive infant boutique. She had arrived for what was supposed to be a routine post-birthday pediatric checkup for her beloved grandson. Instead, she walked straight into a war zone. Patricia froze her sensible designer pumps, halting abruptly on the polished linoleum. Her eyes darted across the wreckage. She saw the shattered plastic of the formula bottle. She saw Cameron straightening his custom silk tie while glaring at Monica. She saw her former best friend sobbing against the reception desk, clutching the wailing infant. And then she looked down at the floor. She saw her golden child, her perfect, successful, wealthy son, pinned to the ground by a massive security guard, his face pressed into a puddle of spilled milk. For 3 entire seconds, Patricia simply short-circuited. Her wealthy, elitist brain could not process the degrading spectacle. But then her gaze snapped upward and locked directly onto me. In Patricia's twisted, narcissistic reality, Greg was a flawless entity. He could do no wrong. Therefore, any misfortune that befell him had to be the result of a malicious external force, and I had always been her favorite scapegoat. Patricia dropped the expensive gift box. It hit the floor with a hollow thud. She let out a high-pitched theatrical shriek and lunged forward, marching straight past the security guards and pointing a manicured, trembling finger directly at my face. "What have you done, Diana?" Patricia screamed, her voice echoing shrilly off the clinical walls. "Tell these thugs to take their hands off my son right now. You orchestrated this, did you not? You bitter, psychotic woman. You could not stand to see Greg happy, so you hired these people to attack him in a public hospital." I did not take a single step backward. I looked down at her finger hovering inches from my nose, and then looked directly into her frantic eyes. "I did not hire hospital security." "Patricia," I replied, my voice completely calm, an icy contrast to her manic hysteria. "Your son assaulted another man. They are simply restraining a violent aggressor." Patricia scoffed a harsh, ugly sound. She turned her venom toward Kendrick, who was still holding the federal medical documents. She looked at my brother-in-law with unfiltered elitist disdain, completely ignoring the silver federal badge clipped to his belt. "And you?" Patricia spat, glaring at Kendrick. "I always knew Sylvia married a street thug. You bring fake forged documents into a hospital to terrorize my family. You think you can print out some medical jargon on a piece of paper and convince us that my son is defective. Greg is a prime physical specimen. He is an executive. He comes from a superior bloodline. Diana is the barren failure. She is the one whose body could not perform its basic biological duty. She paid you to forge this absolute garbage because she is drowning in jealousy." Kendrick did not react to her thinly veiled racism or her classist insults. He simply held up the hospital letterhead. "This is a federal diagnostic report," Patricia Kendrick stated, his deep baritone cutting through her shrieking. "Your son has complete azoospermia. He is permanently sterile. The child is not his. If you have an issue with the science, you can take it up with the Federal Medical Board. But screaming at me will not magically rewrite his DNA." "Lies!" Patricia roared, stomping her foot on the floor like a petulant toddler. "It is all disgusting, vindictive lies fabricated by a discarded wife who has absolutely nothing to live for." Patricia spun around and rushed over to Monica. She wrapped her arms protectively around Monica's trembling shoulders, shielding both the sobbing woman and the crying baby from the rest of the hallway. Patricia glared at Cameron, who was watching her with an expression of profound disgust. "Do not listen to them, Monica." Patricia cooed, her voice instantly softening into a sickeningly sweet tone as she stroked the baby's head. "We know the truth. Look at this precious boy. He has Greg's strong jawline. He has his eyes. He is my grandson. Nobody is going to take him away from us. These people are just trying to extort us because Greg is so incredibly successful." Cameron let out a dark, terrifying laugh. His fury was momentarily eclipsed by the sheer absurdity of Patricia's delusion. "You are just as delusional as your pathetic son," Cameron sneered, taking a slow, deliberate step toward the two women. "You want to talk about extortion, lady? Ask the woman you are hugging right now about the $50,000 in crypto she demanded from me last month to keep my name off the birth certificate. Ask her how many times she visited my penthouse while your son was at the office. That kid does not have a single drop of your precious bloodline. He is mine." Patricia clamped her hands over her ears, squeezing her eyes shut. "I will not listen to this slander!" she shrieked, shaking her head violently. "You are a liar! You are all liars trying to steal our joy. Diana put you up to this because she wants half of everything Greg has built. She wants to ruin him because he traded up for a real woman." The security guard pinning Greg to the floor finally hauled him up to his feet, keeping a firm grip on his arms. Greg looked like a broken man, his pristine suit ruined, his breathing heavy and ragged. He looked at his mother, his eyes wide with a desperate pleading panic. "Mom," Greg gasped, his voice cracking. Tell them it is a lie." Patricia rushed to her son's side, ignoring the firm warning from the security guard to keep her distance. She grabbed Greg's face in her hands, planting a frantic kiss on his cheek. "Of course it is a lie, my sweet boy," Patricia cried, her hysteria reaching a fever pitch. "You are perfect. You have always been perfect. They are just trying to drag you down to their miserable level. Diana is a pathetic auditor who makes pennies compared to you. She is trying to weaponize this hospital to trigger a lawsuit because she is completely broke." I stood perfectly still, my hands resting smoothly by my sides. The pure, unadulterated madness radiating from Patricia was a masterclass in psychological projection. She was so desperate to protect the fragile illusion of her son's supremacy that she was actively rewriting reality in real time. She refused to accept the biological truth. She refused to accept the crypto broker's testimony. She was backing herself into a corner driven entirely by a toxic elitist pride that could not tolerate the concept of failure. Patricia turned back to me, her face flushed a deep, mottled red. "You think you have won, Diana?" She sneered, her upper lip curling into an ugly snarl. "You think this little circus performance is going to break my family? We are untouchable. Greg is a genius. You think you stripped him in the divorce, but you are nothing but a blind fool. You have absolutely no idea who you are messing with, or the kind of power my son truly holds." My eyes locked onto hers. The clinical machinery in my brain hummed to life, anticipating the exact moment her arrogant hysteria would override her basic survival instincts. I did not say a word. I just let her keep talking, waiting for her to dig the grave her son was about to fall into. Patricia stepped away from her son, the desperate need to assert her family's dominance, completely hijacking her rational thought process. She squared her shoulders, lifting her chin to look down at me, as if I were nothing more than dirt on the bottom of her expensive sensible pumps. The hospital's security guards were still holding Greg firmly by his arms, but Patricia acted as if he were standing on a triumphant pedestal. She wanted to hurt me. She wanted to inflict maximum financial and emotional damage to prove that the Campbell bloodline was superior to my clinical auditing career. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the sterile hospital air, and unleashed the exact words that would permanently destroy her son's life. "You think you are so brilliant, Diana?" Patricia screamed, her voice echoing sharply down the corridor, reaching every single patient, nurse, and doctor within a 50-foot radius. You parade around with your little corporate title, checking your watch like you control the room. You think you cornered him in that mediation office a year ago. You actually believed he walked away with nothing but his base salary. You are a complete fool. My son is a financial genius. Greg's head snapped up, his eyes widening in sudden, stark terror. His breathing stopped completely. Mom. He choked out, his voice a strangled, panicked rasp. Mom, stop. Do not say another word. But Patricia could not hear him over the deafening roar of her own toxic pride. She was too focused on the twisted satisfaction of shoving my supposed failure directly into my face. He played you, Patricia bragged, waving her hands frantically in the air. He played your high-priced lawyers and that stupid family court judge for absolute fools. While you were busy crying over negative pregnancy tests, he was busy securing his real future. He pulled $8 million straight out of his executive portfolios and funneled it right into an untraceable Cayman Island shadow account right under your supposedly brilliant auditor nose. $8 million, Diana, clean liquid cash. He hid it perfectly during the divorce settlement to ensure his real family was provided for. You fought over the scraps of a joint checking account while he bought a $2 million mansion in Bellevue. You lost Diana. You lost everything. The silence that followed her declaration was absolute and terrifying. The crying baby seemed to pause to take a breath. The mechanical hum of the elevator stopped. The entire hallway felt like it had been suddenly plunged into a vacuum. Greg sagged against the grip of the security guards, all the remaining color draining rapidly from his face. He looked at his mother not with love or gratitude, but with the pure, unadulterated horror of a man who had just watched his executioner pull the lever. "Shut up," Greg whispered, a tear of sheer terror leaking from his eye. "Oh my God, Mom, shut your mouth, you just killed me." I stood perfectly still, my posture rigid and controlled. The information Patricia had just screamed at the top of her lungs hit my brain like a bolt of lightning, instantly illuminating the dark, complex financial web Greg had woven. My forensic auditor instincts shifted into maximum overdrive, rapidly processing the numbers, the timelines, and the corporate structure of his wealth management firm. $8 million. Greg was a senior vice president. He earned a base salary of $250,000 with performance bonuses that occasionally pushed his total compensation near $400,000. Even if he had saved every single penny of his bonuses for the entire 10 years we were married, he could not have mathematically accumulated $8 million in liquid cash to hide in a Cayman Island account. It was a statistical impossibility, unless the money did not belong to him. The pieces snapped together with lethal precision. Greg did not just hide marital assets during our divorce. He had used the chaos of our separation and the distraction of the asset division mediation to cover up a massive corporate crime. He had leveraged his executive access to embezzle client funds, washing the stolen capital through offshore accounts to bypass internal compliance audits. He had literally robbed the very clients he was supposed to be managing. And standing right next to him watching the entire spectacular collapse was his wealthiest client. Cameron slowly turned his head to look at Greg. The raw, violent fury from the paternity revelation was instantly replaced by a cold, calculating, predatory stare. Cameron understood the dark web of high-tier finance better than anyone. He did not need a calculator to realize exactly what Patricia had just confessed. $8 million. Cameron repeated, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that sent a visible shiver down Greg's spine. You hid $8 million in the Caymans right around the exact same time my private corporate trust reported a $3.5 million phantom deficit due to a supposed market fluctuation. A fluctuation you personally assured me was just a temporary algorithm error. Greg shook his head violently, tears of panic streaming down his face. "Cameron, please," Greg begged, struggling against the security guards. "She is confused. My mother is just talking crazy. There is no account. I did not touch your money. I swear on my life I did not touch it." "You do not have a life left to swear on, Greg." Cameron replied, his tone flat and utterly devoid of mercy. "You stole from me to buy a house for the woman who was sleeping in my bed. You used my money to fund your pathetic illusion. Patricia finally realized the catastrophic error she had made. She looked at Greg's terrified face, then looked at Cameron's lethal expression, and finally turned to look at me. The arrogant, triumphant glow completely vanished from her features, replaced by a sickening pale dread. She clamped her manicured hand over her mouth, but it was entirely too late. The words were already out, and they could never be unsaid. I adjusted my grip on my leather briefcase. I looked directly at Patricia, a cold, satisfied smile spreading across my face. "Thank you, Patricia," I said, my voice perfectly polite and incredibly sharp. "I spent 6 months trying to locate the missing capital from our divorce settlement. I always suspected he hid a few $100,000, but I never imagined he was stupid enough to embezzle $8 million of client funds. You just saved my forensic team hundreds of hours of discovery work." I turned my attention to my ex-husband, whose knees were visibly buckling under the weight of his impending destruction. Perjury in a family court regarding hidden marital assets carries a hefty fine and potential jail time, I stated clearly, ensuring my voice carried to the hospital security guards acting as witnesses. But corporate embezzlement and wire fraud involving offshore Cayman accounts carry a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 to 20 years in a federal penitentiary. I looked back at Patricia, whose eyes were wide with pure, unadulterated horror. "You wanted to prove your son was a genius, Patricia," I added, my tone dripping with clinical disdain. "Congratulations, you just proved he is a federal criminal, and you provided the verbal confession in a public hallway filled with witnesses." Patricia let out a strangled, gasping sound, clutching her chest as if she were having a heart attack. She staggered backward, leaning against the wall for support. Her golden child was not just sterile and cuckolded, he was a thief heading straight for a federal prison cell, and she was the one who had happily handed the government the key. Cameron did not wait for the hospital security to release their grip on Greg. He did not care about the federal embezzlement charges or the offshore accounts I was already planning to dismantle. Cameron operated in a world where money was simply a tool, but blood and loyalty were the ultimate currency. He slowly turned his attention away from the broken, weeping wealth manager on the floor and locked his dark, furious eyes onto the woman standing by the reception desk. Monica was trembling violently. The crying infant was clutched tightly against her chest, his small hands grasping at the fabric of her expensive designer blouse. She had played the ultimate high-stakes game of deception, believing her beauty and manipulation could easily control two wealthy men simultaneously. She had built her $2 million Bellevue illusion on a foundation of lies, and now the architect of her destruction was standing directly in front of her. Cameron closed the distance between them with slow, terrifying precision. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to scream to command absolute authority. His presence alone was enough to make Monica shrink backward until her spine hit the hard edge of the wooden desk. "You really thought you were the smartest person in the room," Monica Cameron stated, his voice a low, lethal rumble that carried the weight of an execution order. "You thought you could sleep in my bed, demand crypto transfers to keep my name a secret, and then parade my son around town as a trophy for this pathetic, sterile thief." Monica sobbed, shaking her head frantically. "Cameron, please," she begged, her voice cracking into a high-pitched, pathetic whine. "I was protecting him. Greg is crazy. I needed the house for stability. I love you, Cameron. I always loved you. The baby needs his real father." The sheer audacity of her lie made Cameron let out a harsh, humorless laugh. His eyes narrowed into dark, cruel slits. "You do not love anyone but yourself, Monica. You are a parasite. You attached yourself to Greg for the real estate, and you attached yourself to me for the cash. But your little game is officially over." Cameron reached into his custom-tailored suit jacket and pulled out a sleek, matte black smartphone. He tapped the screen twice and held it up so Monica could see the digital display. "As of 20 minutes ago, the 3 offshore crypto wallets I set up for your discrete monthly payments have been completely drained and permanently locked." Cameron announced, his tone perfectly flat and entirely devoid of mercy. "The platinum black cards you have been using to fund your luxury shopping sprees are deactivated. You currently have absolutely zero access to my capital." Monica gasped, her eyes widening in sheer panic. "You cannot do that!" She shrieked, her fake maternal persona completely vanishing as the reality of her financial ruin set in. I have a child. You cannot cut me off. I will go to the press. I will tell everyone about the hush money. Go ahead, Cameron challenged, tilting his head with a cold, predatory smile. Call the press. Tell them you extorted a crypto broker while married to a man who embezzled $8 million of client funds. Let us see how much sympathy the public has for a gold-digging fraud. Cameron took one final step closer, pointing a sharp, authoritative finger directly at the crying infant. And you are not going to use my son as a financial hostage ever again. My legal team filed an emergency ex parte custody petition at 9 o'clock this morning, the exact moment the DNA results were legally verified by the federal lab. You are an unemployed extortionist facing potential criminal conspiracy charges. I am a billionaire with a flawless legal record. A family court judge is going to grant me full physical and legal custody of that boy before the end of the week. No! Monica screamed, clutching the baby tighter, causing the child to wail even louder. No, he is mine. You cannot take him from me. He is all I have left. He is not a paycheck, Monica Cameron replied, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. He is my blood, and you are never going to use him to extort another dime from me. My lawyers will contact you regarding the immediate surrender of the child. Enjoy the Bellevue house while you can, because once the FBI seizes Greg's assets, you will be living on the street. Cameron turned his back on her, entirely dismissing her existence with absolute finality. He gave Kendrick a brief, curt nod of mutual respect, adjusting his custom silk tie before walking back toward the elevator bank. He stepped inside the silver doors sliding shut behind him, leaving the devastation of the hospital corridor entirely in his wake. Monica slid down the front of the reception desk, collapsing onto the linoleum floor. She buried her face in the baby's blanket, sobbing uncontrollably. Her entire world, her wealth, her status, her leverage had been completely vaporized in less than 5 minutes. Greg, who had been watching the entire exchange from the floor while still pinned by security, suddenly stopped struggling. The manic panic that had consumed him upon hearing the embezzlement confession shifted into something much darker. The absolute reality of his sterility, combined with the public humiliation of Monica's betrayal, triggered a violent psychological snap. His fragile, arrogant ego completely shattered, leaving behind nothing but pure, unadulterated, venomous rage. Greg hauled himself up to his knees, violently shoving one of the security guards away. The guard, surprised by the sudden burst of adrenaline, stumbled backward, allowing Greg just enough space to lunge toward the reception desk. "You filthy, lying whore!" Greg screamed. His face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. He pointed a shaking, dirt-stained finger at Monica, who recoiled in terror. "You let me buy that house. You let me spend my money on his bastard kid. You sat in our living room and smiled while I bought you diamond rings. You used me." Monica looked up at him, her mascara running down her cheeks in dark, ugly streaks. "You deserved it," she shrieked back, her own vicious nature finally exploding to the surface. "You are a broken, defective man, Greg. You could not even give me a real child. You spent your entire life pretending to be a big shot, but you are nothing but a sterile, pathetic thief. Cameron is 10 times the man you will ever be." Greg let out a horrifying, guttural roar. He threw himself forward, his hands reaching like claws toward Monica's throat. The remaining 2 security guards tackled him instantly, slamming him face first back onto the hard hospital floor. Greg thrashed violently, kicking his legs and screaming obscenities that echoed down the entire corridor. "I hate you!" Greg roared, tears of pure animalistic rage streaming down his face as he struggled against the heavy boots pinning him down. "I am going to ruin you, Monica. I am going to make sure you rot in the gutter. You are nothing without my money. You are nothing." Patricia stood frozen against the wall, her hands covering her mouth, tears streaming down her own face as she watched her perfect golden family tear each other apart like rabid dogs. The illusion of the superior Campbell bloodline was completely incinerated, replaced by the ugly, vicious reality of their mutual greed and deception. I stood perfectly still, my hands neatly folded in front of my blazer, watching the two people who had gleefully destroyed my marriage absolutely annihilate each other. They were drowning in the exact toxic floodwaters they had created. And the most satisfying part of the entire spectacle was that I did not have to lift a single finger to push them under. The violent thrashing finally drained the last reserves of Greg's manic adrenaline. The three hospital security guards managed to drag him backward, forcing him into a kneeling position against the pale fluorescent-lit corridor wall. His custom-tailored navy suit jacket was torn at the shoulder seam, and the expensive Italian fabric was heavily stained with spilled baby formula and hospital floor wax. He was panting heavily, his chest heaving with exertion as he stared blankly at the absolute wreckage of his carefully constructed life. Across the hallway, Monica was still sobbing hysterically, curled into a pathetic ball at the base of the reception desk. She refused to look at him, clutching the crying infant tight against her chest, as the reality of her own financial ruin crushed her. Patricia remained frozen near the shattered medical poster, her hands covering her mouth in silent, horrified shock. The elitist matriarch, who had spent the last 10 minutes screaming about her superior bloodline, was now completely mute, watching her golden child face total annihilation. I watched the pathetic scene unfold for another 10 seconds, letting the image burn permanently into my memory. It was a masterpiece of self-destruction. They had walked into this hospital acting like apex predators, ready to mock and humiliate a barren ex-wife. Instead, they had walked blindly into a federal snare and actively pulled the trigger themselves. I adjusted my grip on Sylvia's medical discharge folder and my leather briefcase. My role in this public spectacle was officially concluded. I turned my head and gave Kendrick a brief, decisive nod. It was time to leave. I turned my back on the weeping remnants of the family that had abused me and took a deliberate step toward the silver elevator doors. The sharp, confident click of my heels against the linoleum seemed to snap Greg out of his traumatized daze. He suddenly realized that the woman he had spent years belittling, the woman he had specifically stopped to ambush just 20 minutes ago, was walking away with the absolute power to destroy his freedom. The blind rage he felt toward Monica evaporated instantly, completely replaced by a suffocating, terrifying panic for his own survival. "Diana, wait!" Greg gasped, his voice cracking into a pathetic, desperate wheeze. He shoved his shoulder forward, fighting against the exhaustion in his muscles. He managed to break his right arm free from the security guard's grip just long enough to lunge across the hallway toward me. His fingers clamped violently around my forearm, his grip tight and frantic. "Diana, please," Greg begged, looking up at me from his knees with wide, bloodshot eyes. "Please tell me this is a nightmare. Tell me this is just some twisted game you are playing to scare me. You are so smart, Diana. You can fix this. I am sorry, okay? I am so sorry I said those things to you today. You know I did not mean them. I was just angry. We were married for 10 years. You cannot just leave me here like this. Please help me." He was actually trying to leverage a decade of emotional abuse as a bargaining chip. He genuinely thought he could appeal to the loving, devoted wife I used to be. But that woman died the day I sat in a lawyer's office and watched him swear under oath that our joint savings were depleted, while he secretly funneled stolen client funds to buy a luxury mansion for my best friend. I did not flinch at his sudden physical contact. I did not try to forcefully yank my arm away or scream for the guards. I simply looked down at his trembling hand clutching my tailored charcoal blazer, and then I looked directly into his terrified, broken eyes. My resting heart rate remained perfectly steady. I reached over with my free hand and peeled his fingers off my sleeve one by one with surgical clinical precision. I stepped back, smoothing the wrinkled fabric of my jacket. "Our marriage ended the moment you decided my worth was entirely tied to my biology, Greg," I stated, my voice echoing with a chilling absolute finality. "I am not your wife anymore. I am a senior forensic corporate auditor, and you just stood in a public hallway filled with witnesses and proudly confessed to committing perjury during a federal divorce mediation." Greg shook his head violently, tears of pure terror spilling over his eyelashes and tracking through the dirt on his face. "I can give you half. he whispered frantically, completely ignoring the security guards who were moving to restrain his arm again. I will give you $4 million right now, Diana. Clean cash. Just do not call the federal authorities. Do not look into the Cayman routing numbers. Please just take the money and walk away. I smiled a cold, predatory smile that completely froze the remaining blood in his veins. I do not want your dirty money, Greg, I replied, my tone dropping to a lethal whisper that cut straight to his core. You committed perjury during our divorce. You hid $8 million of embezzled corporate funds. I am not just reopening the family court settlement to adjust the asset division. I am going to bankrupt you. My forensic team is going to rip apart every single corporate ledger, offshore trust, and shadow shell company attached to your name. By the time I am finished dismantling your fraudulent empire, you will not have enough liquid capital left to afford a public defender for your federal embezzlement trial. Patricia finally found her voice, letting out a horrified, high-pitched wail as the reality of my threat sank in. She lunged forward, trying to reach her son, but a passing nurse firmly intercepted her, urging her to step back against the wall. Kendrick stepped smoothly between me and Greg, his massive frame forming an impenetrable physical barrier.